Dr. Rama, Hilchos Tefilin, this is a parak test. This parak is unique. This parak, if you're a Baki B'Shas, you still don't know. Also, Rama, if you're Baki B'Shas, you know these are not really found in the Gemara so much. There is a Masechta Sefer, but a lot of it has to do with the Rambam's own, understanding of different snippets of the Gemara here and there. And before I should discuss where the Rambam got exactly these details and these products.
From the Rif, probably.
Yeah, fine. Even that, I'm not sure. Halacha Aleph. This is going to be the format of a Sefer Torah. In Eizin Sefer Torah, the Arka Yasa al Kefei, the Rambam holds a Sefer Torah ideally supposed to be made in a way that when you have the Sefer Torah rolled up in one column like a Megillah, as if it was Megillah Esther, when you have the height of the Sefer Torah, however tall it is, if you're going to wrap a string around it, like a belt around it, that should be exactly 1/3. It should be the same, as the height. In other words, roll of paper towels. Roll of paper towels is what? Is 12 inches maybe? I don't know. Is that what it is? So if you wrap a string around it, if it's 4 inches, perfect. If it's also 12 inches, right? Then exactly what you want. This Alderach over here, right? That's how it should be. So the height of the Sefer Torah and its circumference, as we say in English, should be the same.
So the belt is mamish as in
That's, in other words, no. I'm just using as an example. If you wrap a string around it,
yes,
it should be the same. That string you can wrap around it should be as high as it. Yeah, this is because it's nicer if the Sefer Torah looks like that instead of being tall and thin or short and wide like one of those old-fashioned movie reels. It's not a cover thing. It's nice if a Sefer Torah. This is the nicest way to make it Sefer Torah look fine. Kamu are how is the ideal? What is the ideal length? Meaning in our case, height of the Sefer Torah. The gevil, if it's made on gevil, which is the ideal, the thicker part, which is how you're supposed to do it. Shisha tvachim should be 6 tvachim tall. Shem arba me'esem etzba b'reichef agudl shiyat. How many fingers is 6 tvachim? Each tefach is 4 fingers. What is 6 times 4? 24. So 24 fingers tall. That should be a Sefer Torah measured as the thumb as it is. Chaim would say it's 48 centimeters, which is 19 inches. Yeah, not so much. I said this is like a small Sefer Torah, a personal Sefer Torah, right? That's not a big shul Sefer Torah. That's the ideal size. But klaf, now if you're making it on klaf, the klaf is a little thinner. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Depends. I guess klaf is harder to make it exact. I'm not sure exactly why that is. Fine. So point is that whatever you make it 7 tvachim tall, make it 5 tvachim tall. As long as the circumference is the same as the height, then you've done this inyan. Similarly, if it's tak gvil, but you made it less than 6 tvachim tall, but you also wrote smaller, so the whole Sefer Torah is smaller. Maybe you made it more than 6 tvachim tall, made wider letters in that case, maybe. In other words, that bottom line is you made the ksav wider though, so Sefer Torah is longer Sefer Torah. But the point is that it is thicker and more columns, and therefore it's thicker. So then, as long as you made it proportionate that the circumference and the height are the same, that's the ideal mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. Halachah base. The Rambam is going to tell us how to do this because the Rambam wants you to know kol kukah, right? And how. Shir Hagilim Omata. Now, we have every Sefer, and Sefer Torah has a column. You write a Sefer Torah, it's not ideal that you should write mamish in the last line. You think I'll fill up every single space, it'll be cheaper, I have to pay for less klaf. You shouldn't do that. The column on the bottom, below the line, the last line of the Sefer Torah, the blank part, should be Arbat Zbayis 4 fingers. On top should be 7, there should be 3 fingers. Okay, so that leaves you that total of 7 fingers of the column that is not going to be used for writing. It's just there for the margin on top, not the margin on the side. It's called the header, I guess, the footer, on top and on bottom. So of our 24, it's boyas. 7 are already taken for this purpose of blank. How many fingers are left for the purpose of writing? What's 24 minus 7? 17? Yeah, 17 fingers for writing space. Bain daf and daf shtei etzbais. Now, besides for that, between the columns, the word daf and omud are interchangeable. Between you write in columns. Oh, when peg test, yeah. Between the columns, you're supposed to leave 2 etzbais. In other words, the way it is ultimately at the end of the day, when you finish writing and you make yourself a potato, the columns should be separated by 2 fingers each. So 2 fingers space, 2 finger margin between the columns. That's how it's supposed to be. Okay, therefore, because that's how it should be at the final product. When you're writing 3 or 4 columns on one piece of cloth, good, leave a space of 2 fingers. But because the space between columns is also going to be the space between the cloth themselves sometimes, right? Because when you write 3 columns of this cloth and 3 columns of this cloth and you sew them together, Now the last of this one, this one are going to be the space between them also should be 2 fingers. Therefore, leave at the end of these columns a little more. So you should have space to sew. At the end and the beginning of each piece of parchment, yiriyah is a piece of parchment, piece of skin. Leave an extra finger besides the finger we mentioned for the purposes of sewing. So if you use a finger of here and a finger there to sew, now in the safer I have 2 fingers between these pages because I left extra space for the sewing, and therefore ultimately, just like between the columns in each individual parchment I have 2 etzbayis, between the columns as they come together, when the 2 parchments are sewn together, I also have 2 etzbayis. Good. Yeah.
Oh, I actually have 4 etzbayis.
No.
Between the 2.
No. You leave 2 columns, and when you're going to sew it at the end, you leave 2 fingers in this one, 2 fingers in this one. These 2 are used for sewing, so they don't really, they kind of overlap, or they bend backwards, whatever it is. But only 1 finger remains visible to the eye when you have the Sefer Torah laid out in front of you. Right, so much over here. You have space between these columns. It's automatic. Over here, the same amount of space, pretend, but you had extra paper behind that you twisted, that you sewed. When you sew the part pieces together, yiyah being called daf between each and every column. The whole sefer of every sefer Torah kulei is supposed to always have 2 fingers, even between the columns that meet at the edges of the parchment, not just the columns in the parchment. You also have to leave space at the very, very first column. Piece of parchment. In the very, very last yiriyah, extra space to roll it around the sticks. It's chayim. It seems that this is not stamazaya etz teva. There's a halacha about having this, and the pasuk discuss if you're allowed to use the Sefer Torah, it doesn't have that. Right? I didn't even know that. That's my kamash one. That I don't know. But apparently there's a question whether or not, if you're allowed to use the Sefer Torah. The answer seems to be yes, but it's not so simple. This is not just etz teva. You're supposed to have these pieces of wood. I guess you made a metal in them, right? I don't know. Okay, upon them, they have to be there. Good, halach, but you have to leave extra space to sew the parchment around that, you can wrap it around and have it there. Good. We're up to here. Yeah. These all these different amounts about the Sefer Torah being, exactly the same as it's with, a column of 3 etzbayis on top, 4 on the bottom. Sorry, 4 on the top, 3 on the bottom. No, 3 on the top, 4 on the bottom. Whatever it is, all this is the mitzvah. What if I leave 3 fingers between each column? It's not ma'akif. If you change a little bit, it's not possible. But this is how it's supposed to be. Okay, sounds good, excellent. How could I arrange it to become the chavin that my Sefer Torah will be? The height will be the same as the circumference. Says it. Here's what you do. Ready? Write this down. First, you take all the different skins. You have to make sure they are the same squareness, meaning every Sefer Torah, obviously, that you want them all to be the same size, not the same width. You have wider ones, narrower ones, but the same height. It should be even. So you have to make sure they're all the same squareness in the sense of all 6 tvachim tall. Ideally, make that height 6 tvachim. 1 measurement for them all. See, now you have a whole pile of pieces of cloth, one on top of the other. They're all exactly the same height, 6 tvachim, or in this case you call it width because you're standing over here. 6 tvachim. Some are longer, some are narrower in terms of this way, but they're all the same this way. Fine. Afterwards, take them all, put 1 eitz chaim in one end, wrap the whole scroll. Well, the Ram didn't tell us this, but I guess he assumes that you already sew everything together. You wrap it all together in one scroll and you tighten it very, very good. You keep adding skins and tightening it as you keep measurement because your Sefer Torah height has been set out. All the cloth are 6 tvachim tall. That's your height. How do you make sure the circumference is 6 tvachim? When you wrap the first cloth, it's not 6 tvachim. It's very narrow. As you keep adding, you get closer and closer to that amount. You keep going. Until you get to a point where now you have a string of you measure with a string of shani. Shani actually is context means silk, not wool, by the way, apparently, because silk doesn't stretch, apparently. But you wrap it around it. So that's what you use. You have now, again, let's go back a few words. Yet now you have a circumference, which is 6 tvachim, which is the height of your Sefer Torah, of your parchment. Perfect. Now you know exactly this is going to be a Sefer Torah. Ideally, this is supposed to be the exact measurement of what the Sefer Torah is supposed to be. But it's blank. Now, how do you make sure you fit the whole entire Torah on this? If you're going to write too big, you come to the end, you have to start adding parchment. It's not going to be 6 tvachim. It's going to be 7 tvachim. Or whatever. It's going to be more than ideal. And if you write too small, you're going to have to start to take away parchment. It can be less than 6. So how do I make sure that the writing I'm going to do now is going to fit exactly, at least as close as possible, to this amount of parchment? Says it down.
For the Tefach, we follow the other rule of the Rambam with one thumb.
Whatever, it's not a gear over here. As long as it's uniform.
I'm just trying to get an idea of
obvious.
6 Tefachim. How in our measurements,
48 centimeters, 19 inches.
No, 19 inches.
Yeah. Now you take a straight, flat piece of wood. Should be about 40 or 50 etzbayis, right? So 50 would be a little bit more than 6 tefachim. 40 is a bit less, so it's 48 etzbayis. Okay. You divide it with, by fingers. Excuse me. Yeah, the chalak etzbach mehem makana. In other words, basically the point is you make like a ruler with inches, but here you make with etzbayis. Yeah, I have it at home. I got in the mail from an organization a tape measure that has the chazaniya shittas of an etzba and a tefach. It's very cute. Okay, so you divide it l'shnayim l'shloish l'arba chalakim. Divide it 2, 3, 4 parts. Because you should know shir chatzi etzba. So you make basically marks for etzbayis. You make 40. Let's say if it's 40 etzbayis, make 40 marks. But also between them, you should make like some one for what's a half an etzba, at least some part of it, and what's a third of an etzba, right? And so you have a quarter of an etzba. Based on this division, yeah. Fine. The yimdei call, because sometimes you have to know that half etzbayis. You want to compensate this. We'll see. If you did call then you should measure the entire length of this scroll. You spread out, open the Sefer Torah, spread the whole thing out. I guess you do part of the time spread the whole thing out. You get the point. What is it? You're kind of counting cheshbon. How many etzbayis we have? 40, 80, 120, right? You keep going, or 50, if it's 50 long. You want to know exactly how many etzbayis long is this perfectly shaped Sefer Torah, blank Sefer Torah. Okay. Now I know the amount of fingers there is in the entire length of Sefer Torah. Why? So I should know how many fingers there are in the entire thing. I should know. I measure each individual piece of parchment that I'm saying. How many fingers long each one is. Some are 20 etzbayis. I don't know, 30 etzbayis, whatever, 30 and a half. I measure each one, and then this way I have the entire total at the end of how many etzbayis there are in the entire scroll. Fine. So I was describing how you're measuring it. Let's say if you have 40 etzbayis, you roll it out, and you keep doing 40 times 1 times 2 times 3. Now I'm saying measure each scroll, each part separately. 26 etzbayis, 32 etzbayis, 45. That's a little harder, but okay. The point is that you're measuring, getting the total of how many etzbayis long the Sefer Torah is. Fine. Then you take other pieces of parchment, scrap paper, right? You're going to use this to practice. 2 or 3. To expect your size of your penmanship you're writing. The case is then you write on them daf echad, one practice column of a Sefer Torah. Why have to write a whole column, not just one line? I'm not sure. But okay, I guess because maybe one line you don't know, you want to make sure it's uniform and Ksav is easier if you have a few examples. Okay, yeah, right. You write one Amud, right? British, the first Amud, or any Amud you want, really, I guess.
What they do, they start with a Megillah.
No, that's about the practicing in terms of this is talking about how to figure out your penmanship is. That's in terms of figuring out. Yeah, here he's just practicing to see will my handwriting fit this shape Sefer Torah. If I write very big, it's not going to work. If it's too small, it won't work either. It's obvious, we said clarified before, that every column you're writing is going to be 17 fingers long. Because we said 24 etzbayis per 6 tefachim per cloth. 7 is for margins, or not margin, top and bottom margins. You use 17 etzbayis. If you write where it's 1 line per etzba, it's going to use 17 lines only, which is pretty big, I believe. The Rambam is going to tell us later on, I think he wrote 3 lines per etzba. We'll see soon. The fish, because he did this himself, as he says. The fish who maniach gilyon arba. Right? He said before the ma'ala shleisha ma'at arba. Since you left 3 fingers on top, 4 on the bottom, that 24 minus 7 is 17. So that leaves you with 17 etzbayis of space for writing. That's the actual writing space. The width, everyone's different, right? How many words, letters can you fit on a column?
30.
Well, we said yes, but how many etzbayis is that? If you write an etzba per letter, that's 30 etzbayis. It's very big. If you write smaller, it's still it's half of that. It's much smaller, right? So how big is your writing? In document of it's thick or it's thin. The chemia should also have the number of lines per column. And shibadaf will be based on your writing. Because again, you're supposed to place a line between each line of empty space. And then if you write very big, if you write, for example, one etzba, a full etzba of writing, so how many lines can you fit in 17? Only 8. Only 8, because you also have to leave blank space in between. So it's very little. So based on that, there's no right or wrong. The point is that you have to know what is your handwriting, what is your style. And then you have to correct it based on as we'll see now. This is the one that it's not so hard, but the lashon sometimes throws me off. Let's. After you wrote the column that you're going to put for practice, based on your preference of writing style. Now take your finished beautiful column.
One second, but there's a very important thing missing. That he's not telling you how many lines to write. Right?
42.
Oh, how many lines depends how small, how big your ksav is.
So the problem is, how can you possibly figure out?
Oh, that's exactly what I'm saying now. After you wrote this column, you practice on this scrap piece of parchment we described before, right? On the side. This is not on the secretariat. You're writing on scrap paper. As your preference. This practice column that I write on my debut job, first day on the job as a sefer. How many fingers wide is that column? I write the column. I write exactly how it tells us 30 letters per column. The Shvachasem 3 times, right? I write the whole column. How many fingers wide is it? If I have very, very large writing, it's maybe 15 etzbayis. If I write very small, it's maybe 7, 8 etzbayis. Right? That depends on my style. So measure it to see how many fingers wide it is. V'yeshif, and then add in your mind and mathematically ad recha vadaf shtei etzbayis ben gadaf vadaf. Also cheshv in your mind that if that's going to be your writing style, and every column is going to be as wide as this penmanship is. Your Rambam right now, the letters are very small, so it's much narrower. If it's the other kind of Rambam, the exact same column is very, very big. Fine, whatever it is, but however big your sample column that you wrote is, add in your head 2 etzbayis because every column has to have 2, right? Fine. So now, if my column is 5 etzbayis wide, that means I need for every column I have 7 etzbayis, right? Cheshbon out, as we'll see, basically 5 etzbayis wide. If this is 5 etzbayis, every column will have to have 7 etzbayis because the space afterwards between the next column. And then you're going to cheshbon out how many columns, how many dafim is the same thing, yeah? How many amudim, how many columns are going to come out in this whole entire, and this, how many columns like this will fit into this sample sefer Torah I have sitting over here waiting to be used. Based on that one, and they say you'll figure out how many dafim can fit in it basically. So I'm going to ask what the double lashon is. But here's the point: is like this. Now I want to know. We already measured how many etzbayis long the sefer Torah is. We already know how many etzbayis my personal column is. How many of my columns? What's the proportion of this column times X into this scroll? If it fits exactly, my handwriting is the perfect one to fit the sefer Torah. If it's too big, I have to make my handwriting smaller. If it's too small, I have to make it bigger, as Rambam says of me. Then you'll see how many. Sorry, 1 second. So how many pages will come out from in the scroll that you rolled up based on your handwriting, and then you'll turn out how many columns can be in that entire cheshbon, right? So I know it. I measure my sefer Torah. Let's say my sefer Torah is 1,500 etzbayis long. Yeah, fine. And I know that each column for me I need 6 etzbayis. 4 for my writing, 2 for the space. What is 1,500 divided by 6? 250. So I know I'll fit 250 columns. That's how I can fit in this graph. Is 250 enough for a sefer Torah? Or is it too much? Is it too little? We'll see. Then I can out how much can be written from this type of column, which my practice column, in the entire Torah. I can measure based on the sefer Torah for which I'm practicing, assuming that sefer Torah is done correctly in terms of 6 tvachim tall and 6 tvachim circumference. So Chashim also call a Torah and make a calculation if the entire Torah will be exactly the amount of columns that's required. In that case, you hit the jackpot, your handwriting is the exact amount necessary for filling up this Sefer Torah, and you can write your Sefer Torah, and you can be confident that you will finish it exactly, and it will be 6 tefachim tall, and you won't have to add or subtract any klafim, it'll be 6 tefachim in circumference. However, if it turns out that the amount...
But you have to do your math based on knowing how many words there are in the Torah.
No,
No,
I need to know how many columns are required. How many columns are required in my...
It'll depend how many aces there are.
Once I know how many etzbayos wide the column I have is, and I cheshbon that to the Tivitar I practice from, so then if, for example, my ksav yad is 10 etzbayos wide, and this Sefer Torah is 10 etzbayos wide, and this Sefer Torah is exactly 6 tefachim tall, 6 tefachim around, I know if I use this width of etzbayos, I will be able to write this Sefer Torah exactly like that Sefer Torah was written. That's the main thing. Now you're asking, now 1 second. What if I'm 6 tefachim, but I only fit 6 words, and he's 6 tefachim, he's 12 words? So that's why we're cheshbing over here. That's what we're cheshbing over here. 1 second. Okay, it's a good question. 1 second. It's going to come down to clear. We'll see. Okay. If it turns out, okay, 1 second. If it turns out that the amount of columns I need are more than in the Sefer Torah, the amount that based on the measurements I did with how many place long it is. In that case, I should make the ksav wider in the sense that
You'll have less stuff.
I'll have less dafin. And I should experiment again to make sure that it matches. Again, then if it turns out the amount of dafin I'll write won't fit in the Sefer Torah.
So you just should...
Sorry. The amount of columns that are going to come out. Yeah, it's going to be basically, I'll have empty space at the end. So I should make the ksav bigger. So by making the ksav bigger, there'll be less individual columns. Each column is a bit bigger, and this way it'll fill up the Sefer Torah. The end, and then expect again. If it's fakir, it turns out that the Torah I'm going to write requires more columns than the amount of columns available in the Sefer Torah. You might then you have to make the ksav smaller. This is the way you'll have more individual columns. And then try again and experiment again. Experiment again and again. Until it comes out to one cheshbon. And once you know the width of the column and the size of the writing, then you can start writing with that particular scroll that you prepared at 6 tefachim tall and 6 tefachim circumference, right? So the point is that you have to cheshbon. What is the relationship between the column I'm writing, right? Because you ask how many letters per page. Again, we ask, what if it's both 6 boys? Mine's 10 letters, yours is 30 letters. Every column is 10 letters. That's not changing. So that's how each column is. I don't write a narrow column of 5 letters. You write 10 letters. Everyone writes 30 letters. I say them 3 times. How many fingers wide is that? If it's an etzah per letter, 30 etzbayos. That's very big. If it's a quarter of an etzah per letter, it's a quarter of 30, which is, I don't know, whatever, 9, yeah? So that doesn't change. But how many etzbayos will this 30-letter column, which is, every Sefer Torah is the same format, 30-letter columns, how many fingers wide, how many inches wide is 30-letter columns? That depends on your handwriting. You have to fashion it in a way that column of 30 letters per every single column, except for the shiddur, whatever. I get 3 letters per column. That is going to be proportionate to the amount of. Fine, correct. Different in letters and space. That goes into the cheshbon. Yeah. No, so that's part of the cheshbon. That doesn't change the column width. Every column is 30 letters wide. Some of those places are blank because of the psuchas stuma.
But you don't have 30 letters on the.
It's a space of 30 letters. So fine, that line has 2 letters. 2 words, one at the beginning, one at the end. But the column is the same, the margin is even both sides. You see what I'm saying? Over here, yeah, these are the same width. Over here, there's empty space. It's a psucha. Fine, but the width is the same. Good. So good. Now, let's see what you're copying from, right? So if you cheshbon, what's the proportion of your column of 30 letters to that column of 30 letters? That is 6 etzbais wide, that column of 30 letters. Your ksav is a bit bigger. Your ksav is 6.5 etzbais. So you have to cheshbon, I'm a half an etzbah more than will propashly be available in this Sefer Torah. Again, assuming you measured how many etzbais wide your Sefer Torah is, and possibly how many etzbais wide the one you're copying from is. You can't write Sefer Torah by heart, and therefore you cheshbon to make sure that the width of the column should be proportionate in a way that you're going to fit it into the Sefer Torah. Good. Then you divide every single. So now you know you have the right amount. Then you have to divide every single piece of parchment into individual columns. Besirted by making the indentations, you have lines, right? Now it's ruled. How wide should each line be? How many etzbais wide should each line be? As wide is the amount of centimeters, millimeters, etzbais of your ksav yad. Now, when you get to the end of each individual piece of parchment, you have only 3 or 4 etzbais left. Leave one finger for the half of the margin, then one finger for the sewing purposes. Then you get to shadow, the rest you're going to cut off. So, for example, if every column requires 6 etzbais, so I have enough space in this piece of parchment, the wide piece of parchment, I have enough space for 4 columns. So I make 6 etzbais wide of lines. Then I leave 2 etzbais, do it again, 2 etzbais, do it again. Then at the end I have 5 etzbais. So what do? I have extra. Well, from those 5, 1 you need for the margin, 1 etzbah you need for the part you're going to sew. The rest, the other 3 etzbahs, you slice it off. Now your Sefer Torah is 3 etzbahs shorter than you thought. Half cheshbon, you keep the number of cuttings you did, and at the end you'll add that amount at the end, right? Because you want to make sure you have it should be the same width, the same circumference. So as Rambam says. Leave one finger. Leave also another etzbah b'pashas or whatever is necessary for the sewing purpose. The rest cut off. Don't be worried about the fact. Don't worry about the fact now your Sefer Torah is shorter than you planned. At the end, you're going to add extra pieces of parchment to the scroll, corresponding to the additions that you cut off because they were surplus extras after each piece of parchment. Let's say you cut off 3 etzbais on this piece, and then 3 etzbais on the next piece, and 4 etzbais on that piece. That's 10 etzbais. So now you have 10 etzbais lacking that you have to add at the end. You have to take another piece of cloth that's 10 etzbais wide and add it. You can have a lot more than 10 because you have to do this many times probably. What are the chances you're going to have even exactly the width of the parchment is exactly each piece to your handwriting? Very, very small, right? That's not going to happen. You don't have to keep the cheshbon. What's not changing is how many etzbais long your Sefer Torah is. What is changing is how many pieces of parchment is necessary. Because as you keep cutting, you have to add a piece of parchment. That's fine, but the width, the Sefer Torah length.
That's not fine because then you might have the circumference, which is the reichav, going to wind up being wider than the eirach.
No, because let's say it's 6 tvachim tall and 1,500 tvachim long. It's long. It will be 1,500 etzbais at the end as well. Because when I'm cutting off, I'm going to compensate and make up by adding more at the end. So it's going to have the same amount of length from start to finish, and therefore the width stays the same. Because the clock, nothing changed.
Right?
I'm going to cut out a total of 100 etzbais. I'm going to add at the end 100 etzbais.
Okay. What I don't understand, if you were...
So let's finish halacha, yeah?
You finished? No?
I did?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, right, okay.
If you're practicing, why are you going to have left over?
Because the amount of width of every cloth depends on how big the behemoth is. You don't always get lucky enough for the cloth. It's exactly the size of 4 amudim, 3 amudim, 2 amudim. Sometimes this cloth can fit 2.5 amudim. You can't have half an amud. You can't write out one column. You can't have the Sefer Torah sewn in the column.
No, but he says you'll measure that you should make each cloth.
If I can fit, how many of my handwriting columns can I fit on this piece of cloth? 3,
So you
4,
3. Let's say 3.
Let's say 3.5. What do you do now? What do you do with the extra half? You You can have more than 2 etzbayis. You have to.
So make a wider collapse.
No, you don't want to do that. You already have your formulation. It's not important that how many pieces of parchment or how wide or how narrow they are. You don't care about that. It's not a geya.
And does it have to be uniformed? Obviously, yes.
Yeah, but what you have to uniform is your handwriting on the paper. How wide or narrow each piece of paper is, you don't care. You cut them off to make sure that they have. If you're lucky enough that every single piece of cloth is exactly it can be evenly divided with no remainder of 1 or 2 or 20 amudim, then fine. This is not gay, but that's not going to happen. It's not possible. Sorry. If you want to make it more than 6 tachim wide, tall, a pachish or less, al derech says is machashav the same proportion calculation. Yatsa arkik kefei, turn and make sure that the circumference is the same as the height, but not more or less. As long as you keep your math straight. The width of this finger is the thumb is the amor b'chal chashun halo, and all these matters. B'shar shun Torah kulan, also every area of Torah. Where is the average thumb. We ready. This is shear. We're very careful about it. And it turns out this is a width of 7 barley corns of average. Side by side. 7 side by side pressed together is the same as 2. I guess turned on their long end, not pressed together. The tefach we always describe the 2 etzbas for these fingers and these thumbs. And every amma is 6 tefachim. Sefer Torah shekasafti. I need the Sefer Torah. I wrote to the Rambam.
What does mezul mean?
Huh? No, these the good lets. What he means?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't count this.
Not usually. Not them says not.
So the good is this.
Yeah. Sefer Torah shekasafti. I need the Sefer Torah. I wrote. Reichav called out from the Arapah the width of every one of the columns. Abra it's 4 etzbayis wide. So every column is really 6 etzbayis because you have to have 2 after each one for the margin. But the Shir Hayam Shazina, however, the Shir and Yam Shazina, those columns, Reichav called daf and dafam sheish etzbayis is actually 6 etzbayis wide, which means 8 columns for those 2. Okay, 8 etzbayis. Mina shitin b'chol daf and daf, the amount of lines for every single column. How many lines of writing the Rambam fit in 17 finger widths? Achas 51. 17 times 2 is 51. The Rambam wrote 3 lines per etzba, which means a half etzba per line, because it's a line plus a space. So a line space 1 etzba, a line space 4 etzba, a line space 6 etzba. Sorry, a line space, lines with line space. That's 1 etzba, total of 17. How many columns does the Rambam Sefer Torah require? 226 amudim. So now that makes a lot of sense. Think about it. Why? Because the Rambam was telling us his Sefer Torah was if every column was 4 etzbayis, right? And sorry, 1 second. Every column, the Rambam said, how many dafim? 226 dafim. 224 of them were what? Were regular dafim. And each daf, we said, requires 6 tefachim. 6 etzbayis, excuse me. So let's see, 224 times 6 equals 1,344. Then there were 2 columns of 6 etzbayis, which is really 8. That's another 16. That's 1,360. The Rambam says the whole sefer was 1,366 etzbayis. Why is 6 etzbayis extra? The extra 6 ones is legilya is to wrap the sefer Torah 3 etzbayis at the beginning and the end around the 8 chaims. I use ram skin for my sefer Torah. If you want to write based on my measurements, I cut close to them as long as it's close to it. If you want 1 column more, 1 column less, because just 1 or 2 extra columns is not going to change the circumference. If 1 extra paper towel is not a difference. Therefore, that's the cheshbon you says